I'm Krystal and welcome back to my Texas kitchen. Today I'm in the kitchen canning up some ground beef and I thought I'd bring y'all along and show you how I do it. All right, y'all, this is where we're starting. I've got about 16 pounds of ground meat. It's an 80-20 blend that I'm going to can up for our extended pantry. An extended pantry is a pantry that does not require electricity to store food. We're going to start by cooking our ground meat, and we're going to cook it to where there's no pink left in the meat at all. Let me show you guys this really cool tool I have. I got this from Pantry, I guess about 10 years ago, but it really makes light work of breaking up any type of ground meat. It just breaks it up so nicely. I think these are more readily available now. You can get it anywhere, but I got mine from Pantry and I absolutely love it. Now, the method I'm going to be using today for canning this ground meat is a dry can method. It's not exactly FDA approved. However, I've been using this method for several years now. After seeing one of my favorite home preservers, home canners on YouTube using the exact same method. I've never had any issues with spoilage, and the oldest jar of canned meat that I've opened using the dry can method was 2 years old and was still as perfectly fresh as the day I put it into the jar. What I'm going to do now is drain out this meat. We want to drain as much liquid out as we possibly can. Okay, so now we're going to start filling our jars up. And I'm going to do this kind of in small batches here. Put about 3 scoops into the jar. Remove my canning funnel. And start pressing it down. And you want to press it down to where all the air pockets are out. You see how it's real loose? I'm going to start pressing that down. And it's much, much easier to do with this on the countertop. But I wanted you guys to get a good idea about what I'm doing here. And we're just going to keep pressing this down. Now, you can can ground meat in either quarts or pints, and for years, because of the kids, I canned ground meat in quarts. However, since it's just the two of us now, we're empty nesters officially, we don't need as much food canned in quarts. Now, each one of these pint jars is going to hold right at about a pound of cooked ground meat, which that doesn't sound like a lot, but it does shrink a lot when you cook it down, depending on how much fat content was in the meat to begin with. In canning ground beef, this is probably the hardest part of it all, is pressing it all down into this jar and making sure that you don't have any air pockets. Now, in all honesty, if you had to, you could stretch 1 pound of cooked ground meat for 4 to 6 people. I mean, you could stretch it a really long way. Now, I found this ground beef on sale for $2.99 a pound, which here lately makes this a really good deal. So anytime I find really good deals like that, I really try to get things put away in jars, dehydrated. That way I can save it in our extended pantry. Here we are, we're all packed down, and we're packed to a 1-inch headspace, which is right at about right here. So now I'm going to clean off the top of my jars with vinegar. I'm going to do this a couple of times, especially with ground beef because it is kind of greasy. Well, a lot greasy. So I'm going to clean this off, and then right before I put my lids on, I'm going to go ahead and clean it off again with vinegar. I'm going to go ahead and get my workspace cleaned up because I've got ground beef all over the place, and I'll come right back. Now, I've already cleaned all of the rims of the jars with vinegar the first time. Like I said, I like to do it twice when it comes to ground beef especially. Ground pork too. And now I'm going to add half a teaspoon of salt to each jar. You do not have to do this at all if you don't want to. I just find it adds a little bit of flavor. And if you're canning in quart, you would use 1 teaspoon. So I'm just going back with a clean paper towel and vinegar and cleaning these rims one last time. Want to make sure that it is free of any debris, oil, salt, anything that's going to keep that lid from sticking. And now I'm just going to put my lids and rings on. And the lids that I am using are the Harvest Guard lids, and I absolutely love them. I'll go ahead and link you guys a video that I did, a couple of videos that I did on them. I did a review video, and then I did a how-to video. They're very, very easy to use, well worth the investment. Especially now that canning lids are kind of hard to come by. The canner that I'm using is a 23-quart Presto canner, and we can actually double stack these pint jars, which is what I'm going to do. This particular canner will hold 18 pints. However, I've only got 11. And if you're processing something for the same amount of time, some other kind of meat, you can actually, put it in here at the same time. But I don't have anything else that I'm processing. So 11 cans into the canner. Now we just wait for it to come up to temperature. Now once it comes up to temperature and this pops up, we're gonna let it vent, and hopefully you can see that steam here. If you can see that, we're gonna let it vent for 10 minutes, and you can see we're still at 0 pressure. Okay, so it's vented for 10 minutes. Now I'm gonna put my weight jiggler on here. Oh, nice and quiet. As y'all can see, the little jiggler is jiggling away, and we're at 10 pounds of pressure. I have already adjusted the temperature back here, and you may need to play with the temperature a little bit because you don't want it to fall too much, but you also don't want it to get too high. So I see it's falling, so we're just gonna adjust that just a little bit there. You'd have to check your altitude to see what you need to pressure can at, but if it drops below that, you have to start your time all over again. So it's really important to keep a check on the temperature, make sure it doesn't get too hot, make sure it doesn't get too cold. And this is definitely not a time that you want to leave your house and do yard work or anything like that. Clean up your kitchen, grab a book, grab a cup of tea or a cup of coffee, and sit while you're waiting on this to process. Now that the timer has gone off, this is fully processed. I turned off the heat and moved it off the heat. We cannot open the pressure canner just yet. We have to make sure that all of the safety valves have gone completely down before we take this off. And this could take anywhere from 20 to 30 minutes. Right now that this has fallen, I'm gonna go ahead and give it about 10 minutes before I pull the jiggler off. All right, time to take the little jiggler off, set it aside, and we're gonna let this cool down just a little bit more before I take the lid off. All right, now it's time to open the canner. Now keep in mind, everything is still very, very hot, so make sure you open it away from yourself. Okay, and there's the first one. Now as you can see, it's still boiling. It's still very, very hot in there. Hopefully you can see that right there. And you can see that this actually does have liquid in it. It's the liquid from the meat. Oh yeah, look at that. Still very, very hot and boiling. With these Harvest Guard lids, we have to tighten them up after processing, and that's what I'm going to do now. Now we're going to cover these up and let this come to room temperature gradually. It's going to take about 24 hours before I can take the rings off. All right, y'all, it's been a little over 24 hours now. I've already cleaned up all of my jars and I've removed all of the rings off of my jars. Now, this is a dry can method, meaning I did not put any additional liquid in the jars. Now, this is ground beef. However, you can dry can any ground meat that you want. If you've got venison on hand, turkey, chicken, pork, you can dry can any of those using this exact same method and the exact same steps that I did today with great success. With dry canning, you're going to process for the exact same amount of time and pressure that you would for normal meats. You'll also prepare your canner exactly the same way you would for any pressure canning project. Don't forget to splash a little bit of vinegar in your canner to keep the jars cleaner. Now you see that I've taken off all of my rings on my jars. And just to show you how well these are sealed, these are the Harvest Guard lids, and they really sealed well. The reason why you want to remove your rings from your lids and jar is because if something goes wrong and the food inside the jar begins to spoil, gases will begin to build up and pop that lid right off. If you leave the ring on, the lid is unable to pop off and you then create a false seal. Now, when that lid pops off at any stage of the game now, you don't want to eat the contents of the jar. You do not want to feed your animals the contents of that jar. You want to make sure you discard them in a way that your animals cannot get them. Then you want to sterilize your jar, your lids, your gaskets. I use a little bit of bleach when I'm sterilizing them. Now, you're probably also wondering about shelf life. The oldest jar of canned ground beef that I have opened was just a little over 2 years old. I try to rotate out my stocks to where things aren't more than about 2 years old. But yeah, just a little over 2 years old. The meat inside the jars tasted just as good as the day I put them in. So I did not have any problem with quality or anything like that. So the other thing that you might be noticing with some of these jars is that there is fat in each one of the jars. I am not put off by a little bit of fat in the jars. I know some people are, and they actually go and rinse the meat off, but a little bit of fat in each jar really truly does not bother me. The other thing that you're going to notice is that you're going to see some of this meat is pink, where some of the meat in the same jar is brown. The reason why this is pink is because it's actually sitting in its own juice. So there's actually a little bit of liquid that came from the meat itself that this meat right here is sitting in. And this meat up here has no liquid on it at all. And once you open this jar, all of this pink goes away really quick. Pretty much as soon as it touches air, it turns back to brown. This is not raw meat. Remember, I cooked every bit of this meat before I put it into each jar. So this is not raw meat. It just turns that pink color when it sits in the liquid.